This is the physical difference between brute force energy overload and a perfectly timed pulse. One generates massive structural stress, the other generates clean, coherent work. The modern approach to human performance and physiology operates almost entirely on the first model. We assume the body is a combustion engine. In this model, the logic dictates that adding more input, heavy supplementation, extreme training loads, and constant central nervous system stimulation automatically yields a higher output. But biological systems reject constant force. When you flood a receptor network with continuous high-volume input, the system desensitizes. The resulting mismatch yields sharp diminishing returns, systemic fatigue, and eventually failure. The RAF model approaches biology through a different thermodynamic lens. The human organism is a highly sensitive architecture of nested biological loops, cycles of light, sleep, movement, and feeding. Treating a nested loop system like a linear engine creates immense biological friction. The input that cannot be cleanly converted into the next phase of the cycle is shed as waste heat and cellular exhaustion. True human optimization requires replacing the more is better approach with the physics of coherence. Using the RAF framework, the goal is to achieve the maximum coherent, usable output from the absolute minimum necessary input. This equation defines that optimization principle. Useful work, repair, and adaptive memory make up the numerator, but that entire output is divided by the denominator, the friction, leakage, and noise occurring inside the system. The most superior biological system is the one that converts the least amount of input into highly organized, self-stabilizing output. This thermodynamic law scales across biology. It dictates single-cell mitochondria processing food, entire human ecosystems managing stress, and neural networks governing cognitive processing. We will apply this mathematical axiom to map the exact variables of cellular energy, redefine the parameters of human health span, and decode the structural basis of human consciousness. Biological supremacy is a masterclass in frictionless conversion. This vector equation maps the specific mechanics of that conversion. Input energy is mathematically useless on its own. For an input to become coherent output, it relies on variables like receptivity and phase alignment. This gives us the first rule of the RAF model: match the source to the receiver. Energy must arrive in a specific form the biological system is ready to accept. If the receiver isn't prepared, the input instantly degrades into heat and biological stress. Sunlight hitting chlorophyll yields energy because the light spectrum exactly matches the physical receptor. Food fed to mitochondria only produces work when the redox state, oxygen levels, and timing are aligned. Rule 2 dictates the delivery method. Use rhythm, not constant force. A constant stream of input saturates the system. A rhythmic pulse allows the receiver to reset and respond. Watch what happens here when an external rhythmic input slides into perfect alignment with a system's internal frequency. The moment those frequencies match, you achieve biological resonance. Phase alignment amplifies the output of the system without requiring a single drop of additional input energy. This is why the 24-hour circadian clock acts as the master timing hierarchy for human biology. When behavioral inputs align with that internal rhythm, physiological output surges. Rule 3 demands that we close the loop. Linear systems consume input, perform work, and discard the rest as waste. A looped biological system uses the work phase to trigger localized repair and structural memory. That brings us to Rule 4, convert waste into signal. Under the RAF framework, physical fatigue, poor heart rate variability, and elevated CO2 are unharvested feedback indicating a mismatch in the loop. By reading that biological waste as a diagnostic signal, the organism operates as a self-correcting machine. When an organism uses feedback to repair itself, it actively improves its own future conversion architecture after every cycle. Coherent organisms do not just perform work, they utilize rhythmic feedback to constantly upgrade their own structural integrity. To understand human aging, we have to look back at the denominator of the equation, friction and leakage. This model charts the human health span. It illustrates the body as a series of multiplying biological loops: light, sleep, breath, movement, and food. Notice how the stability of the entire system becomes bottlenecked when friction is introduced. In a human, that friction takes specific forms: circadian mismatch from late-night artificial light, the metabolic cost of an unmanaged emotional threat, and sleep leak. This establishes the absolute prime directive of the RAF intervention method. You must reduce internal friction and leakage before you add any new metabolic inputs. Under this framework, aging is defined as the mathematical loss of fidelity and recurring biological loops, the point where the system can no longer repeat its own internal cycles with accuracy. Health span, therefore, is the long-term preservation of clean, adaptive recurrence across those same cycles, maintained with the least necessary input. Perfect recurrence fidelity looks like this. The system absorbs pressure, processes it, and maintains absolute timing and structural integrity. This frames anti-aging as an engineering problem, the structural protection of loop fidelity against thermodynamic friction. These exact physics of loop fidelity scale directly from cellular metabolism up into psychological and neural frameworks. Under the RAF model, consciousness is recursive biological closure that has the capacity to observe and update its own condition. This flowchart tracks the hierarchy of recursive closure. It begins at level 1, with simple reactive stimulus and response loops. It then scales through predictive and reflective tiers, where past patterns drive expected futures, the mechanics of habit and anxiety. At the regulatory and integrative tiers, levels 4 and 5, the system gains the ability to intentionally shift and synchronize its own state. This is where a human uses tools like breath pacing to align conflicting internal loops, like the drive for ambition competing with the biological need for rest. When all internal patterns, biology, emotion, and identity, begin to align and synchronize, the system reaches its maximum recursive potential. Level 7, Generative Consciousness. Generative consciousness is mathematically defined as stable recursive closure, operating with near-zero internal friction. A system at this level doesn't just manage itself, it organizes the field around it. It results in precise speech, efficient movement, and clean attention, because there is no longer any internal contradiction to burn energy. The highest echelon of human thought is simply the ultimate biological loop, generating profound structural coherence rather than consuming chaotic energy. We can use these laws to build a strict mathematical filter for evaluating any human protocol, from strength training and targeted supplementation to regenerative medicine. This master intervention equation proves input size is meaningless without precise delivery variables. Timing and receptivity are critical. If an input arrives during a sympathetic stress state, it degrades into noise. Input must enter safely and generate adaptive structural memory after each cycle. This strict calculation invalidates the standard biohacking approach. A single isolated hack will inevitably bottleneck if the foundational physiological loops of the organism remain weak and misaligned. The highest return on investment comes from setting the solar circadian lock first, mapping daily movement and breath control, and leaving targeted interventions for last. Passing every protocol through this equation is the only way to protect the human system from mismatched, damaging thermodynamic loads. We can now define the optimized human life as a thermodynamic outcome. It requires the synthesis of coherent energy, stable rhythm, adaptive biological memory, low physiological friction, and a generative conscious state. A human system operating flawlessly under these physics is rare. To approach it, you have to follow the final, uncompromising rule of the model. Do not add more input to a system until it can cleanly and efficiently convert its current input. True human optimization is never achieved by turning up the volume on a broken machine. It is achieved by cleaning the receiver and mastering the rhythmic physics of coherence.